Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we have a little bit longer video. We're going to go into the Katanga class battle cruiser. Now this is Klingon's primary battle cruiser that we originally saw in the original series. Um, and as well as like Wrath of Khan and all that stuff. The Katanga class battle cruiser was a primary class of warship in service with the Klingon Imperial fleet in the late 23rd century. It was um, and sorry, and it was still in use in the mid 24th century. So I'm kind of losing my place here. Okay, history wise, and I'm just taking it straight from D6 Holocron because they have a really big write up here. So we'll kind of go over things from what they have. Okay, introduced in the early 2270s, the Katanga class cruiser was considered one of the most powerful warships in the Klingon Defense Force, even serving as a flagship ship of the Imperial fleet for a time during the 2290s. Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Trek um, 6, The Undiscovered Country, Katanga class cruiser were in service as early as 2273 when the Epsilon 9 station recorded the destruction of three Katanga class vessels by the V'ger entity from the motion picture. Starfleet's interest in the Katanga class cruiser was such that in 2285 the class of ship appeared in the Kobayashi Maru training scenario at Starfleet Academy. This is for the Wrath of Khan. Now, in nearly a century, the Katanga class cruiser proved to be a rugged, sturdy design and saw continuous use in that aspect. They were much like their Federation counterparts, the Excelsior class and the Miranda class starships, whose usefulness outlived contemporaries such as the Constitution class cruiser. With marked improvements, these warships saw continuous use in frontline and border patrol ships throughout the Second Klingon Federation War and the Dominion War in the early 2370s. DS9, Way of the Warrior, Soldiers of the Empire, Call of Arms. They were not always the ship of choice for all the missions, however, as more agile craft like the Klingon Bird of Prey were better suited for some tasks like DS9, once more into the breach. Technical data. The Katanga class cruiser was one of the most advanced and versatile warships in the Klingon Imperial fleet. Although the tactical effectiveness of the Katanga relative to other ships was nearly firmly established in true canon, it was capable of challenging a Constitution class cruiser without fear. And this is from the Undiscovered Country. Threatening an Excelsior class cruiser in a standoff situation. And in small numbers, it could inflict severe damage on an Excelsior class cruiser Voyager flashback. Now, for physical arrangement, the outboard plans of the Katanga design incorporated the same basic shape as the classic design lineage dating back over 100 years with the D5 class battle cruiser. Now, this is the Enterprise Marauders and the like. The Katanga class was a direct offshoot of that design lineage from the versatile D7 class battle cruiser introduced sometime prior to 2267, the original series Errand of Mercy. The bulk of the ship's overall mass was incorporated in the aft section of the ship. The bridge module was located in the bulbous forward section, which was separated from the aft section by a relatively thin connective section that attached to and flared into the aft section located in the caudal. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I think caudal section of the ship, where the ship's impulse engines jutting from below the port and starboard side of the Um, yeah, the warp engine nacelles, which were jutted below the port and starboard side of the ship's section. All right. Um, Aside from posing a slightly sleeker shape and contour than the D7 class predecessor, the most notable design variations between the two classes included a less bulbous forward section, a large bridge dome, differently designed warp nacelles, and more extensive external hull plating, as seen in the motion picture. Now, tactical systems. The weapon systems on board the Katanga class cruisers have included phasers, disruptors, photon torpedo launchers, and concussive charges. We have the Next Generation Emissary, DS9, The Way of the Warrior, Star Trek The Motion Picture, Voyager Flashback, all that to thank for all those. The torpedo launchers included one torpedo tube in the forward section and one aft. The forward torpedo bay was located below the bridge in the foremost part of the ship, while the aft torpedo bay was located between the impulse engines. During the aiming sequence, the interior perimeter of the torpedo tube allowed glowing a bright red until the torpedo or torpedoes were fired. Early on, it was almost like it was a plasma torpedo on this, and I kind of remember a lot of that. And this design was always done very prominent with the Klingons. It always had the torpedo launcher right underneath the bridge module. Okay, let's see. And of course, this is stating, for the motion picture and so on and so forth. Um, the class of ship was also equipped with two forward mounted phasers. The phasers and torpedo weaponry were considered state of the art during the 2290s. They were no match for the Galaxy class starship in the later 2360s, but were, however, more than a match for a weakly defended colony or outpost of that time. Which makes sense. If you're an outpost or a colony, you're only, you're outfitted with whatever weapons. Quite often they don't keep upgrading them as ships keep getting upgraded and newer designs and so on and so forth. So it makes a lot of sense there. By the late 24th century, Katanga class battlecruisers had been retrofitted to keep up with the advancing technologies. In the 2370s, their forward torpedo launchers included a powerful disruptor emitter, allowing these vessels to remain formidable adversaries. Now, this is from the Way of the Warrior and Rules of Engagement from Deep Space Nine. Now, getting down to the cloaking device. All right, these vessels had incorporated, like many Klingon ships at the time, a cloaking device. This hid them from detection on most evasive situations. The Katanga class cruisers underwent several cloak upgrades during the years of service. These cruisers, equipped with cloaks installed prior to 2290, were known for their particular weakness for not being 100% effective at blocking gamma radiation. Propulsion, the warp drive in the Katanga enabled them to reach a warp speed of 5 from the Next Generation. Now, this is where everything kind of gets fuzzy. In the original series, warp was just a number thrown out there, and it has been kind of noted that in one episode they can only go warp 6, in another episode they can hit 9, another one it could be 12. It all depended on whoever the writer was and whatever they threw out there. By the time we got to the Next Generation, they reformatted the warp drive or the warp speed management system and all that. So everything kind of stayed in line with each other. So if I'm, when I'm kind of looking at things or whatever, um, you'll notice that even an older ship might be able to hit warp 9, but it's not going to be the same the warp 9 that the Next Generation would hit. So the warp 9 from the original series might be warp 5 from the Next Generation, and so on and so forth. It's just how that all worked out. So please, be willing to keep that all in mind. During an encounter between the USS Enterprise D and the IKS Taong, Enterprise chief engineer Geordie LaForge figured that the Enterprise could probably knock out the Kong's uh, warp engines without damaging the rest of the ship as a means of disabling the vessel. Uh, and this is from the emissary. Additional systems, some Katanga class cruisers were equipped with cryonic technology, which allowed crews of the late 23rd century to be placed in cryogenic sleep for long voyages. And this is, again, emissary. Interior design. The primary color scheme of the Katanga class cruisers was distinctively earth tone colors such as beige and gray. In contrast to the corridors found aboard contemporary vessels such as the Bird of Prey, these vessels were considerably spacious in size, most notably from like the Undiscovered Country. Main bridge. The configuration of the darkened main bridge design of the Katanga class cruiser set the tone for many of the later Klingon bridge layouts, including the later Bird of Prey and the Vorcha class cruisers. The main battle bridge, or the main bridge, sorry, was located on the top portion of the forward section of the vessel. Located in front of the bridge, against forward bulkhead, was the ship's main view screen, used by the ship's captain. Featured in the center of the bridge on a raised platform directly behind the view screen was a command chair, which had the ability to swivel 360 degrees. This position provided the commanding officer an unobstructed view of the screen as well as allowed the commander to visually monitor all bridge operations. Directly behind the command chair were two man consoles. The port side had the control over the view screen display and could take the ship into evasive maneuvers, as with the helm control of the Constitution class ship. Lastly, the rear of the bridge were two pivoting weapon targeting stations, which contained the ship's targeting computer systems. An alternate bridge style was also used on the ships of the early 2360s. It featured the captain's chair at the back of a smoky and dimly lit bridge with banners of the Federation and Klingon Empire on the rear wall. This is the Next Generation Heart of Glory. Transporter room. The transporter room aboard the Katang class cruiser contained 5 transporter pads arranged linearly at an angle, and to the right of the pads was a transporter control console with an operator's chair at the left or to the left of the doorway. Star Trek The Undiscovered Country. Stateroom. The stateroom aboard Kronos 1 on the Klingon Chancellor Gorkin's private dining and conference room. The room featured a large transparent pedestal table with an overhead chandelier set on a raised platform with surrounding chairs. Again, this is from The Undiscovered Country. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of the ship. Normally we don't get a big view of what a lot of the enemy ships look like interior wise, unlike what we get with a lot of the Federation ships. Federation usually has a set standard and they try to stay with a set familiarity so that way everything works pretty good. So we'll go from there. Okay, so let's look at the stats that we have here for the Klingon Katanga class battle cruiser. Now, this is the 2267 version, so this is the earlier version. This is a capital class cruiser. Has a length of 214.3 meters, width of 152.46 meters, and a height of 57.3 meters. So this could be anywhere from maybe would be 10, 11, maybe 12 decks, or maybe a little bit bigger, all depending on how many meters you want to see every deck is. And keep in mind, quite often with the Federation ships and all that, we have almost sub levels where we have all of our conduits and everything else placed. So every ship is going to be a little different like that in some regards. So ship mass here is going to be 490,350 metric tons. This is a size 5 ship. It does have an autopilot, so it can pilot at a 2D plus 2, so just a hair better than what your average person is going to do. We have a crew of 385. A skeleton crew of 39 Klingons can operate this vessel, but it will be at a plus 10 operation uh, difficulty roll. Okay, so passengers, we can have about 150 troops on board. Cargo wise, we have up to 300 or 3,250 metric tons of cargo space. Now that gives us enough consumables for 1 year, plus whatever else they have to do. The Klingons aren't, from everything that we get shown. Now, the hardest thing is whenever we're looking at the Klingons, the Romulans, the whoever else besides the Federation, we don't get to see all the extra service vessels. I do have some in some of the books, which is wonderful to have. But quite often, in most of the shows or movies or whatever, we are not allowed to see a lot of their support vessels. We see a lot of the Federation because most of these are Federation based. So it would be kind of nice if they did do a Klingon type show. Deep Space Nine got us a lot of information for the Klingons, but to be able to sit here and say, here's the Klingons, whether you like them or not, this is their way of doing things. This is however things are. Maybe you could have some other enemy that they're fighting all the time, and the Federation helps them and gives them supplies or whatever else. It would be kind of nice in those regards because then we get to see a little bit more. But quite often, because we're always centered on the Federation, that doesn't happen. Okay, so a nav computer. Of course, we're going to have a nav computer on a ship like this. Has a maneuverability of 1D plus 1. So this really does put it on par with the old original Enterprise. We do have a space speed of 8, a hull of 2D plus 2. So for what D6 Holocron has done, that is very much on par with a Constitution class. I don't remember what it was exactly offhand, but I do know it wasn't a huge number. It does have shields of 1D, and these are older ships, so do keep all that in mind, and it is also at capital scale. Now, unlike how we see the Federation, the Klingons, and everything else in like Deep Space Nine and moving forward, we start to see fighter craft, we start to see like carriers and stuff like that. Which does start breaking from a lot of the traditional views we have of Star Trek. But on the other hand, we're also bringing more military views into the universe of Star Trek compared to what we originally got. Remember, watching the original series, yes, they had to deal with things in a military sense, but it was very much more exploratory. Even the most of the Next Generation, it's a lot of exploratory, kind of catching up with other planets that they've lost contact with, all that stuff. So, as things change, we start changing along with it. So, sensor wise, we have passive sensors that can scan out to 4 kilometers with a 1D bonus. We can actively scan out to 12 kilometers at a 1D plus 2 bonus. We do have a search that can go out to 15 kilometers at a plus 2D bonus. And we have a focus out to 500 meters at a 2D plus 2 bonus. So, not the most robust scanning ability, but for the time frame that this is from, this really isn't all that bad. The distance is really good, but the computer systems and everything else are not as robust as what we get later on. Now, a cloaking device for this frame, it adds a plus 2 difficulty for detecting the ship. Okay, weapon wise, so we have 8 Type 6 disruptors, 2 forward facing We have two on the port, two on the starboard forward facing, two ventral forward facing, and then we have let's see, some aft port and that. So let's see, we, crew of one will fire them. Fire control of 1D plus one, not the most robust, but it for its time frame and everything else, it's not that bad in all regards. It has a fire rate of 3, so we can shoot 3 shots per round, and it does 2D plus 2 damage. Again, and to say it in this regards, that's not bad for its time frame. The problem is when we start looking at bigger ships later on, that's not a lot of damage. Now, photon torpedoes, we have one forward, one aft. These are self-guiding. Again, it's a crew of one. Most, like what we see in the shows, we have one tactical officer that's firing all this stuff. Computer assisted, has a fire control of 1D plus 1 to help aid in firing. It can carry 20 Type 2 photon torpedoes, and it can shoot up to 4 torpedoes at one time. And they're doing 4D damage. So this is where it really starts coming into an ouch situation for most ships. And you'll find that a lot often in Star Trek. Now, it has been kind of said in some realms, and however you want to take a look at it, where the shields are good against other energy-based weapons, you know, phasers, disruptors, whatever. If it was a plasma torpedo, yeah, it might be able to do a lot of damage, but they can kind of recover from it. But if it was a physical torpedo, that is where a lot of ships in the Star Trek universe have issues. And even if, because we're doing this in the D6 realm, and it is a possibility you're using the Star Wars D6 system to run Star Trek, which is very, very easy to do. But even if you were to say in a Star Wars realm, that same conversation has been had as well. The actual physical torpedo or missile or whatever else has an easier time getting through some of this stuff. But that's where your deflector dish comes in and moves it away. So you still have to negate your shields to some degree, but whenever we start looking at the damage, that's typically, I think, why we have larger amounts of damage coming from our missile, torpedo, whatever launchers. Okay, so think of it in those regards. All right, so we have 2 class beta tractor beams, one forward, one aft. They have a fire control of +2, and it has a strength of 2D plus 1. And then we also have a alpha class tractor beam for the shuttle bay to bring in the shuttle or starfighter or what have you. And that is a fire control of +2, strength of 3D. Now, miscellaneous, and this is where D6 Holocron really always seems to come into its good flair. The crew quarters. Now, it has 360 barracks for crew members, 120 Spartan. We have 5 basic, which is probably the best you're going to get, and it has 12 decks. So I was kind of close, thinking 11 or so. So 12 decks. We have 120 escape pods on this ship, and they have the capacity for 4 beans in each escape pod. And this is commissioned roughly about 2267 from Earth Reckoning. Now, transporters, we have 3 transporter rooms. Each one has a 6-person pad, so we can have up to 6 people transported out at one time. We have an emergency transporter. We have 3 of those on board. They can move 22 people at any given time. And then we have 4 cargo transporters, which can move up to 200 kilograms. For its time frame, that's not really all that bad. And for complement for craft and all that, we do have 2 shuttlecraft and 20 probes. So again, big ships, not a lot of shuttles or whatever else that's available. And I know I do have some books which do talk about Klingon shuttles. I don't think we really have that many, but I'm still going through and adding this all into my as I'm plugging this in here. And into my Excel spreadsheet so that way I can get all of these and I know which ones I've covered and everything else. That's why I'm doing it the way I am. And then I can print this out and put it into a book for something for later on for me. That way, if, heavens forbid, we lose a resource like D6 Holocron or some of the other ones, which, you know, we always hope those days do not arrive. But if that time ever comes, hopefully I still have a physical copy. That's why I always love having physical copies of books. Because if something happens, you lose that digital, it's just kind of gone, and now you got to look for it or whatever else. So, all right, now we're going to transition over to the upgraded version here. Okay, so we're going to go through all this, even though I'm sure a lot of this is going to be very familiar to what we had before. All right, so again, it's still capital scale. We're at 349 meters. Let's see. Let's see. So we have increased in size because the old one was 214 meters, and now we're at 349. So this is almost twice as big. At least another half size bigger than what we were. So this is a size 7 category ship. The mass, being quite a bit bigger, is 760,000 metric tons. Has an autopilot of 3D. We have a crew which is 347. We can do this with a skeleton crew of 35 with a plus 10. Passengers, we can hold up to 800 passengers, most notably probably Klingon Marines. Cargo capacity is 50,000 metric tons. So this is significantly bigger than what we were doing before. We have consumables for 2 years. We have the warp drive, which I think I forgot to mention in the last one, but we are doing a 6. We can sustain a warp of 9, and we can do a warp 9.6 for 9 hours. So if I was going to bring this into our Star Wars, I would say, because I'm thinking that this is probably, actually, I think maybe I'm messing this up because I think 2350s, this would be like the next generation era type or style. So let me do this. It's a 12x backup. I think we're going to leave the backup there, but I'm going to increase the primary to a 1x because that way it can be on par with all the other ships. This is that much upgraded. Let's see. Of course, we're going to have our nav computer. What I don't see here. Oh no, here's our autopilot. Um, I was thinking our autopilot. Now our autopilot before was a 2D plus 2. Now it's a 3D. So we have improved. The computer systems are improving over time, but this is still an old ship. It's still an old warhorse for the Klingon Defense Force, but they can only do so much. Let's just kind of put it in those regards. They're working with existing designs that do have limitations. Okay, and the Klingons, that's in my mind, they're not as well known for all their big computer improvements. They've always kind of bargained with the Romulans or some other group to try and help give them that one. So I will say it in this regard: if you're bargaining with someone and then they kind of shice you over here a little bit, and you're thinking you're getting a better deal for a better computer than what you are, you're getting a somewhat better computer, but overall it's not going to be as good as what everyone else is doing. We'll say it in those regards. Okay, I had to take a drink. I'm getting kind of thirsty. All right, so sorry. Our maneuverability is only a 0D plus 2, so I think our maneuverability went down. Yes, it did, because we were a 1D plus 1, and now we're at a just plus 2. So it has actually kind of gone down here a little bit. And I'm hoping that you can kind of see this now. Our space went from an 8 to an 8.5. Our hull is a 3D plus 2 from a 2D plus 2. So we have increased in our hull. Our shields were a 1D, now we're a 2D. Our sensor packet here, let's see. kind of went up and kind of went down at the same time. So, uh, it's a give and take here. Okay, so we'll say it in that regards. So we can do a passive scan to 3.5 kilometers with a plus 1D plus 1 to our roll. Our scan went down. It used to be 12 kilometers. Now it's only 10, but we're at a 1D plus 2. Our search is at 14 kilometers from 15, and we were at a 2D. Before we're at 2D plus 1. Our focus is still 500 meters, but we were at a 2D plus 2 before, and now we're at a 3D. So for anyone trying to detect this ship as being cloaked, it's still at a plus 2D difficulty. So keep that in mind. Now our weapons here, we have type 9 disruptor cannons. Now this is a 360 degree forward firing arc. Fire control is 1D plus 1, which I believe is very well improved. We have a fire rate of 5. So we were, I think, 3 before. Now we're at 5. And it was only like a 2D plus 2 before, and now it's a 4D. So we have almost doubled our damage here. We have, now that's our main disruptor cannon. We have also 5 Type 9 disruptor arrays. So we have the arrays very much like what the Federation is using, and it probably comes through from having the alliance with the Federation at this point, so that way they can hit more areas with technically less weapons in some regards. I mean, it takes up a bit of room on the outside, but not as many technical weapons itself. Crew of 1, fire control is 1D plus 1, has a fire rate of 3, and it does 4 damage. Now remember, we had 6 before that were doing, I think it was like a 2D plus 2 damage before. And our fire rate actually went up on just the standard disruptor arrays. So that means that we could still do 15 shots for the most part. I'd give it to someone, seeing that, hey, we have 360 degrees, dorsal, ventral, aft, at least 4 shots. So that'd be 12 shots at 4D damage. Okay, let's see. We have 2 photon torpedo launchers, one forward, one aft, but they're self-guided. Remember, we only had like 20 before. Now we have 100 Type 2 photon torpedoes with a spread of 6. So we can launch 12 photon torpedoes. I'm getting a tongue twister here. And they're doing 4D damage. Now this is pretty much the same as what we had before, but the system, the launcher itself, is actually upgraded that we can shoot more at one time. I think it was only 3 before, so now we can do 6 per launcher. So with one in the front, one in the back, but it's self-guiding. That gives us the ability to maybe shoot 12 torpedoes at one time. We also have 2 class gamma tractor beams, one forward, one aft. Fire control is 1D plus 1, and the strength is a 3D plus 2. And then we have the auxiliary craft. We have 2 bays now instead of just 1, so that's increased quite a bit. So we have tractor beams for that. Fire control is at a plus 2, strength is at a 3D. Now, let's see, we have barracks for 840 crew members. We have Spartan cabins for 120, basic cabins for 75, and extended cabins for 30. And this is really getting luxurious. We have 8 luxury cabins and 5 unusual cabins. So there again, I think the Klingon Empire has also taken over more areas and all that stuff. And maybe I would say that this would probably be the one that we kind of see for Chancellor Gorkin and the like. So, maybe as they're getting older, they want a little extra luxury on there, so on and so forth. Now, we do have 20 decks on here. Before we were at 12. We have 160 escape pods, which can carry 8 personnel in each pod. This was commissioned in 2350 as of Earth Reckoning. We have 3 personnel transporters with 6 pads in each transporter bay. We have 3 emergency transporters which can move 16 personnel at one time. I think that is down. I think last time we had 22. We do have 2 cargo transporters, and before they were moving 200 kilograms, this time they're doing 400 kilograms, which is pretty much on standard with a lot of the other craft that we get. Now, we do have 10 shuttlecraft this time. Before, we only had 2, and we also have 30 probes. Now, Klingons aren't the most scientific. There are some very scientific minded Klingons, but that is a little bit more of a rarity than the standard. And I think usually they're a little looked down upon because, let's face it, Klingons are very much a very warrior based society. So you think of it in those regards. But this gives us a nice view of 2 of the iconic ships that we see from the Klingon Empire. So, with that, thank you for stopping by. I know this is a little bit longer video. I wanted to get both of these ships all at one time instead of breaking it up. And because I'm working on the Klingons, I think for this week, if I can, we'll try and get all the Klingon ships knocked out because Klingons are so iconic in the universe of Star Trek. Whether they're our friend or our foe, however it works out, it's always nice being able to add that extra flair in there. And Klingons do add a little bit of a, kind of friendliness, but also a gruffness that quite often we see sets the Federation just a little standoffish on exactly how they should treat them. So, but it's fun dealing with them that way. So, with that, I hope you're having a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next video.